A wild wolf followed an old hunter through the taiga for 3 days. Not to attack him, but to lead him to something. When the hunter finally realized why, he collapsed to the ground and wept like a child. You won't believe what this animal did. When I heard something snapping twigs to my left, I didn't jump. But when I saw who it was, my breath caught. A wolf stood and stared straight at me, as if waiting. I had set out at dawn, my old pack heavy on my back with canned meat, a canteen of water, a hatchet tied at my belt, and my grandfather's worn rifle slung over my shoulder. I've hunted these forests for 40 years. I thought I knew every whisper of wind and rustle of branch. The first day passed without incident. I followed deer trails, kicking at old footprints, marking them in my mind. By late afternoon, I made camp beside a mossy log beside a creek. My fire crackled. I fried a piece of bacon and sipped lukewarm coffee. The stars flared overhead. All was as it should be. I slept poorly. My dreams mixed with memories of my late wife and empty cabins. At dawn, I kicked at the embers and stood to stretch. That's when I saw them. Prints in the soft mud. Large, four-toed, unmistakable. Wolf tracks. My heart didn't pound. I felt only curiosity. I'd seen wolves before, but these tracks were fresh, too fresh, and they didn't veer off. They followed my own path, as if someone walked in my footsteps. I narrowed my eyes and scanned the tree line. The pines stood silent, a green wall against the morning sun. I adjusted my pack and called into the forest. "Show yourself!" My voice cracked. A branch cracked. I stiffened. Then I saw him. Gray pelt mottled with silver, lean and tall, ears pricked. He stood 30 yards away, eyes fixed on me. He did not growl. He did not flee. He watched. A shiver ran down my spine. He looked at me like I was his only hope. I put my hand on my rifle. My finger hovered over the trigger. Part of me wanted to scare him off, but something held me back. Something in his gaze. Something I couldn't name. I lowered my hand. The wolf did not move. He simply observed. I knelt by the creek and scooped water into my canteen. Every few seconds, I glanced up. He stayed on the bank, just beyond the tangled roots. We were two hunters in a silent standoff. My pack felt heavier now. I forced myself to stand and slung it back onto my shoulders. I started walking again, leaving the creek behind. My boots sank into damp earth. I expected the wolf to vanish into the trees. He did not. Through the morning, I skirted ridges and low valleys. Each time I paused to sip water or tie my boot, I felt eyes on my back. I dared not look over my shoulder. I moved faster. My breath grew shallow. At midday, I stopped for lunch. I broke bread and tore cheese. I thought, it's just a lone wolf, hungry, curious. He'll wander off when he finds fresh deer or a rabbit. He's not bothering me. I ate in silence. I tossed scraps onto the ground, half expecting him to snatch them. He did not come. I stood and packed up. By mid-afternoon, the forest thinned. Sunlight dappled the trail. I felt more at ease. Maybe the wolf had tired of me. Maybe he'd gone hunting. Then I heard it again. That soft crack of a branch. I froze. My heart thudded. I spun around. There he was, just 20 paces away, emerging from the pines. He trotted toward me on silent paws. My breath caught. My finger twitched, but I held back. He stopped 10 feet away and sat, head tilted slightly. He stared. No aggression, no fear, just that unwavering gaze. I exhaled. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was impossible. A wild wolf, doing what a dog might never do, not attacking, not running, watching, waiting. He stood and padded closer, to within 5 feet. I felt the warmth of his breath in the cool air. I thought I could hear his heartbeat. He sat again. His tail swept the needles. In his eyes, I saw something like hope. My chest tightened. I thought of my wife, lost to sickness last year. I thought of my lonely cabin. I thought of a world that had grown cold and empty. This wolf had chosen to stay with me, chosen to share my path, chosen to wait. My mind reeled. I raised a hand, palm out, as if to greet an old friend. He did not flinch. He had no collar, no sign of a trap, no signs of injury, yet he stayed. I knelt and reached for the pack on my back. My fingers trembled. I pulled out a small slab of jerky and set it gently on a flat rock. The wolf watched. Then, with careful steps, he approached. He sniffed. He looked up at me. Then he took it, slowly, respectfully. I felt my eyes burn. I sat down on a fallen log. He finished the jerky and sat back, licking his lips. He stared. The sky was turning gold. Shadows lengthened. I stood, unable to tear my eyes away. I thought, this ends when night falls. He'll go to join his pack, or stalk a deer. I'll finish my trapping line and head home. I took a step forward. He rose, ears forward. We moved in unison. My heart thundered. I thought it was a trick of the forest, a hallucination after years of solitude. But he was real. He was at my side. I whispered, "What are you doing with me, friend?" The forest answered with silence. I thought, it's just a lone wolf, following me in search of food. I was wrong. When I looked over my shoulder again, my heart seized. The wolf stood on the very edge of the trail, half in shadow beneath a spruce, staring at me without blinking. His gray coat rippled in the breeze, but his posture stayed rigid, like he was gauging whether I would keep coming. I took a cautious step forward, and he shifted a half-pace back, neither fleeing nor advancing. That silent dance repeated itself 3 times over the next 10 minutes. I'd round a fallen log or skirt a tangle of roots, and there he'd be, standing exactly where the trail widened, watching my every move. By the time the sun broke through the canopy in slanted gold beams, I felt the first true twinge of alarm. Wolves usually avoid humans. They hunt deer, elk, rabbits, anything but people. Yet this one was tethered to my path, almost as if I were a moth to his lantern. He never growled, never bared teeth. Instead, whenever I paused to sip from my flask or tie a loose bootlace, he held his ground, head tilted slightly to one side, ears pricked. He was calm, but unwavering, an intensity in his amber eyes that I'd never seen in any wild creature. It was as if he were silently imploring something from me. He watched me like I was the last hope. In that moment, the hairs on the back of my neck lifted. His gaze carried a weight, a strange plea that made my chest ache. I glanced at the riverbank off to my left. Clear water danced over stones. A breeze stirred the reeds. All of nature around me seemed to pulse with expectancy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I lifted my rifle to my shoulder, finger trembling on the trigger guard. Yet every instinct screamed that he wasn't a threat. He was neither hungry nor frightened. He simply waited, measuring my heartbeats. My finger slid away from the trigger. I felt tears sting my eyes, though I didn't understand why. He padded forward 3 more paces, keeping exactly 20 yards between us. I unslung my pack and retrieved the last of my jerky, breaking off a small piece. My hands shook as I set it on a flat stone, then stepped back. The wolf approached deliberately, nose twitching, then looked up at me before taking the meat gently in his jaws. I sank onto a mossy log, my legs too weak to stand. The wolf finished the jerky, licked his lips, and resumed his vigil. Every breath I drew seemed amplified in the hush of the forest. I told myself it was a one-off, that he was curious, maybe orphaned, maybe drawn by the smell of my food. I would let him follow until dusk, then slip away while he hunted elsewhere. Yet each time I turned, he was right there, never closer than 10 paces, never farther than 30. He emerged on the trail again, just as I rounded a bend through a stand of young pines. My shadow stretched long behind me. His shadow clung at my heel. My pulse pounded so loud, I thought he must hear it. I dared not speak. He watched me like I was the last hope. I swallowed hard, caught between the primal urge to flee and a deeper, stranger urge to stay. I heard a twig snap beneath a boot, my own, and startled. He paused, then stepped fully into the sunlight, revealing a slight limp in his right front leg. A thin scar ran across his shoulder. He looked old, wiser than most wolves. He was no mere scavenger. My mind raced. Wounded, alone, following a human stranger. Was I meant to guide him somewhere? Was he hurt and trusting me to help? Every rational thought tipped toward danger, but every heartbeat whispered compassion. I gathered what remained of my strength, reached into my pack, and produced a scrap of cloth. I knelt and offered it, half unwittingly, half in hope. He came closer, sniffed, and then, miraculously, lay down a few feet away, as if he'd accepted the gift. I watched, breath held, as he closed his eyes for the briefest moment. A bird call sounded high above, and he lifted his head instantly, alert. I exhaled a shaky laugh. This wild creature, who could have seen me as prey, instead placed a fraction of trust in me. My throat tightened. I stood slowly, believing our encounter would end here. I would stand, he would depart into the shadowy forest, and my heart would return to its normal rhythm. Instead, he rose too, matching my motion, and stepped forward, into the dense undergrowth, leading me deeper. I thought, this can't be real. There is no way a wolf should behave like this. And yet there he was, vanishing ahead of me on the trail, glancing back just once as if to say, "Come on." I told myself it must be a trick of the light, a trick of solitude. I shook my head. I thought it was impossible, but I was wrong. When dusk fell, I decided to test his intentions. I scattered a trail of dried meat toward a rocky outcrop, praying he wouldn't vanish into the woods. He padded after the scraps for a moment, nosed at a piece, then froze, ears perked, head tilted. He turned, met my eyes, and slipped silently back into the shadows, only 50 yards away. He didn't follow the bait. He just watched as if to say, "I know what you're doing." That night, I set a simple snare on the narrow game trail, thinking I might catch a rabbit or at least prove my point. This was a hunter's forest, not a playground for wolves. I anchored the noose beneath a sagging oak, checked it once, then built my fire a stone's throw away. The crackling flames cast long flickers across the clearing. I expected to awake to a twitching trap or to find my fire put out, anything to prove the forest's wildness. But morning came, and the noose lay untouched. Mud was trampled around it, but no sign of a rabbit. Instead, the only tracks leading away were those large lupine footprints, smooth and deliberate. I knelt, brushing soil aside, and saw that he had circumvented the trap entirely, stepping a careful loop around it, as if he respected its purpose or pitied my need to catch prey. Every night after that, I sensed him close, the soft pad-pad of paws just beyond the firelight. Sometimes I'd wake, heart thundering, convinced the wolf was sniffing at my back. One morning I emerged from my tent to find fresh prints circling my lean-to, almost ritualistically. Before leading off toward the deeper forest, I felt watched, protected, unnerved. On the fourth night, I failed to sleep and crept out to check the trap again. Moonlight shimmered on the cold steel, still untouched. I felt something like remorse. How could I strike at the one who had chosen to stay by my side? I recalled his amber eyes when I first offered jerky. I recalled the gentleness in his movements. I whispered to the darkness, "Why are you here?" But the only answer was the rustle of pine needles. I gathered the rope, untied my snare, and tucked it into my pack. The forest seemed to exhale around me. I was ashamed that I had set a trap for the one who might have been watching over me. Yet even after I removed the snare, the nights remained restless. I heard him pacing outside my shelter, as though keeping watch. Each time I poked my head out, he'd be there, sometimes at the edge of the firelight, sometimes perched on a fallen log, studying me. His posture was calm, but I could feel the tension in his flanks, a reminder that he was ever poised between trust and survival. On the 6th morning, I discovered my pack had been shifted. The flap that covered my clean shirt was left open, the tobacco pouch emptied of half its contents. I blamed myself for not tying it securely, but the prints around the camp suggested he'd rifled through my belongings with surprising delicacy, tucking the tobacco pouch on a stump, leaving the canteen untouched. It felt less like theft than investigation. I sat by the smoldering coals, heart sinking. I thought, he's teaching me something about respect, about boundaries, about what it means to share space. But still, doubt gnawed at me. Was he preparing to strike, or was this some test of my own character? That afternoon, I decided to follow him, to prove that he was simply an animal guided by instinct. I trailed his footprints through a bramble patch, over mossy stones, deeper into the pines. Each time I slowed, he slowed. When I paused, he halted and turned his head back to check on me. Each step we took in that silent communion shook me to my core. By twilight, we reached a small clearing where the sunlight danced on ferns. He stopped, sat, and looked at me. There was no hunger in his gaze, no fear, only this impossible calm. I knelt and placed my palm on a fallen log, feeling its rough bark. He approached, sniffed my hand, then pressed the side of his muzzle against it. The contact sent a jolt of warmth up my arm, an electric proof of connection between man and beast. My throat tightened. I traced the curve of his scar with my eyes and understood. He was wounded once, yet still free. He could have fled human scent, attacked my camp, or vanished into the wild. Instead, he stayed, patient, observant, forgiving. I stood and faced him. The first true tears fell down my cheeks. I bowed my head, ashamed of my trap, ashamed of my skepticism. He sat back and gave a low, almost tender woof, like an exhale of relief. I thought the wolf was merely curious and would soon wander off, but he did not. He rose and padded beside me, guiding me back toward my camp. And in that moment, I knew I could never see the forest the same way again. When I reached the fork in the trail on the 4th morning, my throat tightened. The sun had just crested the pines, and I knew the river lay somewhere beyond the next ridge, clear water shining, fish darting under the surface. I ducked beneath a low branch, hungry for a taste of fresh water, when I saw him. The wolf stood dead center on the worn path, broad shoulders blocking my way. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply held his ground, head high and ears forward, amber eyes fixed on me with unflinching calm. My heart thundered so loudly, I thought he must hear it. I stopped 5 paces away and swallowed, tasting pine resin on my tongue. My hand twitched toward my rifle, slung low across my back. I gripped the stock until my knuckles whitened, then raised it to my shoulder, finger grazing the trigger guard. He did not flinch. He did not cower. Instead, he stared as though weighing my purpose in these woods, deciding whether I deserved passage. I inhaled and exhaled, warily circling to look for another way around. But there was none. Thick brush on the right, a sheer bank on the left. The wolf was my only corridor to the river. I leveled the rifle. I thought to scare him off with a warning shot. I thought to force my way past with a bark of warning. But as I peered down the barrel, his gaze pinned me in place. I saw not malice, but an invitation, an impossible invitation. My finger struggled on the trigger until I forced it off. I lowered the rifle, trembling. The wolf's ears twitched, but he did not move. "Go on," I whispered, voice cracking. "Go on then." He turned his head just slightly as if to say, "Come this way." Then he pivoted on his haunches and walked down the path, tail low but steady. He did not hurry. He did not glance back in challenge. Instead, over his shoulder, he looked at me, eyes soft, expectant, urging. He might as well have spoken, "Follow me." I hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting my pack back onto my shoulder and stepping onto the trail he'd cleared. The soft pad of his paws echoed mine, the only sound in the hush of morning. Every nerve in my body trembled with doubt. I told myself, he's leading me to his den. I'll see pups or maybe another wolf. I'll watch from a safe distance and then I'll turn and go back to my camp. This is nothing more than curiosity, I reasoned, a wild animal guiding me to something in its territory. But with each step, disbelief churned in my chest. The forest pressed in around us, shafts of light dancing on dew-laden ferns, the scent of rich earth and pine resin filling my nostrils. Yet instead of feeling alone, I felt accompanied, partnered with this creature of fang and fur. At one point, he paused beneath a massive spruce and looked back. The sun glinted off his eyes, turning them liquid gold. I thought I saw a hint of mischief, or perhaps hope, flicker there. My legs ached, but I pressed on. We climbed a gentle rise, then descended into a narrow ravine where water trickled over mossy stones. The wolf stopped at the edge and sniffed the air. I dropped my pack and knelt to cup the cold water, drinking deeply until my lungs burned. When I looked up, he was sitting calmly on a flat rock, head tilted as if he approved of my haste. I felt a surge of gratitude I'd never thought to owe a beast. I whispered, "Thank you," though I knew he couldn't hear me. Still, he lifted his head and blinked, then rose to his feet. I hoisted my pack and beckoned toward the riverbank. He padded ahead, leading the way through thick undergrowth until we emerged onto smooth stones at the water's edge. The current shimmered, and fish broke the surface in quick flashes. He stopped at the edge of the stones, turned, and gave me one long, lingering look. My chest tightened, and tears sprung to my eyes. He'd brought me here, through unfamiliar trails, around treacherous ground, to this life-giving water. Then, as silently as he'd appeared, he pivoted and vanished into the trees. I knelt to fill my canteen, letting cold water trickle over my fingers. My mind reeled with the reality of what had just happened. A wild wolf guiding me to safety without fear or malice. I thought it was simply leading me to its den. I'd planned to watch, then leave, but instead, it led me straight to a miracle. When the morning light spilled through the pines, I saw that the path ahead had narrowed into a tangle of fallen logs and bristling underbrush. My legs felt leaden from the day before, but the wolf, ever my silent guide, pressed on. He moved with deliberate steps, weaving through the obstacles as though he knew every root and rock. I glanced back, half expecting to find a clear way home, but the thicket behind me closed in like a wall. I thought, perhaps here I can slip away. And yet, when I turned to leave by a side trail, he appeared again. He stood squarely across the narrow track, broad chest blocking any retreat. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply sat down, sturdy as a fallen boulder, his gaze unwavering. A cold knot of panic tightened in my stomach. I realized he wasn't merely guiding me. He was insisting. His ears drooped slightly, and in the amber depths of his eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion, and something deeper, a trembling fear. It was as if he had carried the weight of the forest on his shoulders and could bear it no longer. I stared at him, breath ragged. He sat there, his muzzle lowered just enough that I could see the muscles in his jaw slackening with fatigue. Every fiber of his being seemed to plead, "Hurry!" My heart lurched. I bowed my head, ashamed that I'd ever thought to turn back. I set down my pack and knelt beside him. The forest floor was littered with pine needles, needles that cushioned his heavy paws. His fur was matted in clumps, and I noticed a fresh cut along his side, raw and angry. I'd been so focused on following that I hadn't seen him bleed. I reached out a trembling hand, and he flinched, but only once. Then, as if deciding I could be trusted, he shifted his weight and tucked his wounded leg under him. He let out a soft woof, a breathy sigh of weariness. That moment stunned me. A wild beast, wounded and alone, had placed his last reserve of trust in a stranger. I felt tears sting my eyes. I pressed my palm against the side of his head, feeling coarse fur and the slight quiver of his pain. My mind raced. Was I guiding him to safety? Or was he guiding me to something far darker, a trap, a den of danger? Yet when I glanced around, I saw no signs of other creatures, no scent markers indicating a pack, only the endless hush of the taiga. I stood slowly, helping him rise. He limped forward, each step a testament to his will. I slid my rifle strap over my shoulder and offered him my hand again. He bumped his nose into my palm, then turned toward the deeper woods, eyes bright with unshed tears, his silent plea echoing in my bones. "I'm with you," I whispered. "Tell me where." The path wound upward now, the trees thinning to reveal rocky crags and sheer drops. At times I slipped on wet stones and had to catch myself on saplings. Each time I nearly fell, he paused and looked back, as though to ensure I was still following. His tail would sweep anxiously. At midday we reached a mossy ledge overlooking a steep valley. The wind gusted cold, whipping at my coat. Below, a narrow ribbon of mist clung to the undergrowth. The wolf halted at the edge, scanning the drop with narrowed eyes. He dropped to his haunches and let out a low, mournful yip, almost a cry. My breath caught. I'd interpreted his guidance as a rescue mission, but this cry felt like a warning, yet there was no time to ponder. He limped past the edge, heading down a narrow gully that disappeared from sight. I hesitated at the precipice, then steeled myself and followed. Rocks shifted underfoot, and my heart hammered as I slipped twice. But every time I reached for stability, I felt his presence, just below me, lifting me onward. When at last I stumbled out of the gully, I found myself in a hidden alcove where the sun broke through, illuminating a shallow pool. The water shimmered invitedly. The wolf crept forward and lowered himself, lap by lap, to drink. Each sip drew ripples across the surface, mirroring the tremor in his limbs. He drank deeply, then lifted his head and shook off droplets of water like rain. I watched him, marveling. He'd led me into danger, through unforgiving terrain, and now he drank from this secret spring. I knelt beside the pool, cupped my hands, and took a cold, bracing mouthful. When I looked up, the wolf was standing again, head held high. His wounds seemed less raw, his eyes brighter. He stood like a leader who'd just reclaimed his strength. In that moment, I believed he was leading me to his lair, his home. I steeled myself to peer into whatever dark hollow lay ahead, determined to see the rest of his world before parting ways. I thought maybe he was simply defending his territory, and I would watch, learn, then respectfully leave his realm. But as I followed him from the pool deeper into the cavernous grove, I realized this was more than territory. It was a journey of trust, his and mine intertwined, and I could no longer turn back. The wind had turned icy by late afternoon, and I nearly lost sight of him as the shadows grew long. He slipped between trunks and under low boughs, blending with the forest's gray-green haze. I stumbled over a mossy root, and when I looked up, he was gone. My breath froze in my lungs. I called his name once, then again, but the forest swallowed my voice. I set off down the slope, branches scraping my sleeves. Each footstep felt louder than the last, as if the trees themselves listened. Then I heard it, a soft, quavering sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. My heart thudded. A child's voice, a girl's. I shook my head, certain I was imagining things. But the sound came again, sorrowful and thin, echoing between bare trunks. I pressed forward, following the sound. Snow-dusted ferns brushed my coat. My lips moved without thought. "Hello?" The voice came clearer, a single word I couldn't make out, but laced with fear. I rounded a fallen pine and froze. There, in a shallow hollow, lay small footprints pressed into mud, tiny toes splayed, half covered by leaves. My chest tightened. Human prints, not deer or fox. They led up the bank toward a cluster of birch saplings. My legs shook as I followed them. The voice grew louder, soft sobs punctuated by gasps of cold air. I risked a glimpse through the saplings and saw her. A little girl curled against a fallen log, arms wrapped around her knees, her thin coat soaked through. Tears glistened on her cheeks. My breath caught. The wolf sat a few yards away, silent, unmoving. He did not paw at her, did not growl when I approached. He simply waited, his head low, eyes fixed on the child with a gentle intensity. And in that moment, I realized the wolf was guiding me not to himself, but to someone else. My fingers trembled as I reached for the girl. She flinched at the sight of me, eyes wide with terror. I knelt slowly, hands open. "It's all right," I whispered. Her teeth chattered. I draped my coat over her shoulders, lifting her gently. She buried her face in the wool, and I felt her shiver. I looked up at the wolf. He rose and took a few steps closer, then sat again, as if to say, "She's safe now." His tail thumped once against the moss. I felt my eyes burn with shock and wonder. This wild creature, he had led me through days of uncertainty, not to prove his dominance, but to bring me here, to a child on the brink of despair. I thought, perhaps it's just a lost child, and the wolf followed out of curiosity. But that didn't fit. He had gone to such lengths, endured danger and fatigue, to find her. No mere curiosity could drive him. He had saved her, and I had taken credit for his path. I stood, holding the girl close, her small arms clinging to me. The wolf watched, silent sentinel, until I turned to face him. His eyes held neither fear nor reproach, but a calm relief, as though his mission was complete. I had never believed a creature so wild could feel gratitude or purpose beyond survival. Yet here he was, proof of something deeper, that nature's compassion runs alongside its ferocity. As I carried the girl toward my camp, I heard him padding behind us, each step a steady promise of protection. My heart choked on the enormity of it all. I breathed in the cold air and whispered, "Thank you," though I knew he'd never understand the words. But I understood, and I would never be the same. When I eased her into the forked roots of the old spruce, her body went limp, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She lay there half submerged in a cradle of moss and fallen needles, small limbs tangled in twigs. Her breath came shallow, and when she tried to speak, only a faint moan escaped her lips. Beside her, the wolf sat alert, tail curled around his paws, ears pricked. He did not gnaw at a bone or prowl the perimeter. He simply kept watch, as though nothing mattered more than guarding this fragile girl. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead, and the wolf's coat rippled in the dim light, but he never wavered. I knelt and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and for a moment I thought she didn't know where she was. She whispered something I couldn't understand, words half-formed, like a dream dissolving at dawn. Her hand flexed, slipped from my grasp, and twitched once against the cold earth. My throat tightened. I glanced at the wolf, and in his golden eyes I saw a quiet intensity, no hunger, no fear, only unwavering vigilance. He'd stayed by her side all this time, through every trap I set and every false turn I tried to take. He had sheltered her with his presence when I worried only about myself. I bent to press my cheek against her clammy skin. She smelled of pine resin and the faint sweetness of sap. I felt tears sting my eyes as I realized, if not for that wolf, she wouldn't be here. He had found her before I even knew she was lost. He had refused to leave her, even when his own wounds ached and the forest grew cold. I steadied my voice. "Hey," I said, "I'm here now. You're safe." She blinked and managed to nod once, then drifted back toward sleep. I let out a shaky breath and sat back on my heels, heart hammering in my chest. The wolf rose and padded forward, sniffed her coat, then pressed his muzzle gently to her shoulder. He gave a low, rumbling breath that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. I watched, transfixed, as he circled her and settled at her feet, still guarding, still sure. I reached into my pack for a blanket and draped it carefully around her shoulders. Each motion felt slow, as though I were moving through water. When I straightened, the wolf lifted his head and met my gaze. In that look lay the story of every mile he had traveled, struggle, hope, and an unspoken promise kept. I swallowed hard, voice thick. "I owe you more than I'll ever repay." He cocked his head, as if pondering the debt, then gave a single, soft woof, half question, half acknowledgement. I turned back to the girl. She moaned softly and curled into the blanket, her breathing steadier now. Relief flooded me. My eyes blurred as I realized how close we'd come to tragedy. I thought, I can finally lead her back to safety. I'll carry her to my camp, build a fire, warm her up, and then we'll go find help. The wolf will fade into the woods, and I'll tell the story of my brave companion. But the wolf did not move. He remained seated, head bowed slightly, waiting for me to follow. He seemed to say, "This is not the end of my watch. This soul came into your care, but I brought you here." My breath caught. I straightened and nodded. "All right," I whispered. "Show me the way." He rose smoothly, turned toward the deeper trees, and paused just long enough to ensure I was behind him. I scooped the girl into my arms, light as a bundle of autumn leaves, and rose to follow. The wolf led us through narrow shafts of moonlight, his pace steady despite the darkness. Each step was measured, deliberate, as though he could sense every creak of a broken branch and every gasp of cold air. The girl stirred once, mumbling, but did not wake fully. I stumbled over roots and stumbled again on stones, my arms aching under the girl's weight. Yet every time I faltered, I felt the wolf glance back, meeting my eyes, urging me onward. He navigated the twists and turns as if the forest itself were carved to his memory. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through a dense curtain of undergrowth into a moonlit clearing. I recognized the spot. It was the ridge above my campsite. Fatigue melted away, replaced by a surge of gratitude and wonder. I laid the girl gently on a bed of pine boughs I'd set out earlier. She shivered but nestled deeper into the blanket. The wolf sat at the edge of the firelight, head turned toward me, waiting. I stared at him, words failing. "You did this," I choked out. "You saved her." He met my gaze one last time, as if to confirm the truth of it, then rose and slipped back into the forest, vanishing among the shadows. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed. I understood, finally, that this was no ordinary animal, but a guardian of the wild, a creature capable of compassion beyond my imagining. I lifted my hands to the sky, voice trembling. I thought maybe he was just defending his territory, but I was wrong. When the girl's lips curled into a hint of rest, I knew she was finally dreaming peacefully. The fire crackled between us, its warm glow chasing away the evening's chill. I gathered dry kindling and coaxed the flames higher, then dug into my pack for the last of the jerky and a tin of beans. Gently, I coaxed the food into the hot pan, savoring the hiss as oil met meat. I returned to her side, settling onto a fallen log. She lay swaddled in my coat, chest rising and falling in the rhythm of sleep. I dipped a spoon into the steaming beans and lifted it to her lips. She took the bite without waking, then exhaled in her sleep, a small smile flickering across her face, Beyond the firelight, a silhouette formed at the tree line. The wolf sat, body still, eyes fixed on us. He did not step closer. He did not whine or nudge. He simply watched. The silver in his pelt glinted under the moon, and I felt his gaze like a weight on my shoulder, silent, wary, protective. I turned toward him. "She's safe," I said softly. My voice sounded foreign in the hush. The wolf's ears flicked, but he remained unmoving. He watched me feed her, watched her settle deeper into the blanket, and then turned his head to the sky, nostrils flaring as if tasting the forest's promise. In her dreams, the girl murmured, her voice low and tender, "Siri, you kept me safe. You are kind." My breath caught in my throat. Siri, Gray One, was the name I'd given him when I first saw his mottled coat. The girl's voice, even in sleep, carried gratitude I could scarcely comprehend. A wild wolf, dubbed nothing more than Prince of the Taiga in hunters' tales, had become her guardian. I stared at the wolf, struggling to knit together what logic I had left. He should have vanished the moment she awoke, or when the first sparks flew. Instead, he had lingered, through my cooking, through my whispered reassurances, through her fragile dreams. I stood and approached the edge of the firelight, boots crunching on pine needles. The wolf remained seated, head held high. His eyes glowed with something beyond the wild, purpose. I raised a hand, uncertain what to say. "He left without waiting for thanks," I whispered to the night, "because he knew. He'd done the most important thing." He shifted, rose, and with one last lingering look, turned away. He did not pause for a second glance or a final nuzzle. He melted into the shadows of the pines, every step silent. Moonlight traced his spine as he slipped beyond sight, like a memory dissolving at dawn. I sank beside the girl, tears pricking my eyes. The forest exhaled around me, leaves rustled, distant owls hooted, and the last embers danced. I pressed a hand to my chest, where my heart still pounded with awe. I thought this would be the end of our story. I'd build her a shelter, warm her bones, guide her home at first light, and Siri would be a tale I told by hearths, a legend of mercy in the wild. But deep in my bones, I knew the real journey was just beginning. The wolf had shown me that nature holds wisdom beyond our reckoning, that kindness can live in the teeth of the wild, and that some bonds transcend words. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind in the pines and the soft breathing of the sleeping child. As dawn stirred the horizon, I vowed to carry this moment forever, to live with the understanding that sometimes the greatest miracles walk on four paws and vanish without fanfare, leaving only the echo of their grace. That morning, the frost still clung to the pine needles when I crawled from my bedroll and stepped into the hush of dawn. The embers of last night's fire were cold, only a thin wisp of smoke curled into the pink sky. I knelt beside the girl, now wrapped in blankets and breathing steadily, and my eyes drifted to the ground around her feet. There, pressed into the frozen earth, were tracks, 2 days' worth of them, leading in a perfect ring around her resting place. Paw prints, deep, deliberate, unwavering. My breath caught. The wolf had lain watch over her not for minutes or hours, but for all the time she'd been lost. He had found her first, discovered her shivering under that fallen spruce, yet he had done nothing to harm her. He had neither driven me away nor claimed her as prey. Instead, he had waited, through hunger, through cold, through weariness, for someone to come. A tremor ran through me. I traced the edge of a print with a bare fingertip. It was jagged where he'd slipped in the mud, and worn down where he'd lifted his paw again and again. I realized I had been following him for 3 days. 3 days of fear and awe, of doubt and wonder, never guessing that by doing so, I was witnessing something far greater than any hunt or hardship I had ever known. Tears pricked my eyes as I fell to my knees, My hands dug into the frozen soil, clutching handfuls of earth and moss. I bowed my head, overcome. How could I ever explain this? How could I reconcile the brutality I had always believed ruled the taiga with the mercy of this solitary wolf? I slammed my fist against the ground. The sound cracked in the morning air, salty tears mixed with grit on my cheek. I couldn't stop the words that tore from my lips. Why did you do it? Why were you kinder than us? My voice echoed between the trees. No answer came, only the soft sigh of wind through the spruce branches. I knew he was gone, had vanished before first light, unwilling to wait for my gratitude or my questions, because he had done what mattered most. I straightened, voice trembling but determined. I cannot believe this, but I saw it. I followed the beast, and it was a human soul that was saved. I gathered the girl into my arms as she stirred, blinking up at me with new, untroubled eyes. I wrapped her in my coat and rose, carrying her to the river where the water ran clear and cold. As I knelt to fill my canteen, I let her sip the life-giving flow. Each swallow seemed to wash away the tension in my bones, yet the memory of his sacrifice, his silent, steadfast care, stayed with me like a living thing. I settled her by the riverbank and built a fire. Flames licked the wet stones, sending sparks into the pale sky. I fed her bread and warmed her fingers around the mug of coffee I'd brewed. She drank, gazed at the flames, then whispered sleepily. He was so gentle. He stayed with me. I nodded, voice thick. Yes, he stayed with you. The sun climbed higher, gilding the treetops. I scooped her into my arms again, cradling her like the precious soul he had protected. Behind me, the forest pulsed with life, birds calling, wind rustling, the river's steady rush. But my mind was fixed on those wolf tracks encircling her sleeping form, the emblem of a bond that transcended blood and pack. As I set out along the trail toward home, I felt eyes on my back, an old echo of his vigil. I dared one look over my shoulder through the bending pines. There, at the edge of light and shadow, I thought I glimpsed a flash of silver fur, just for a heartbeat. Then he melted away, leaving only the memory of his devotion. My chest tightened. I thought of all the hunts I had led, all the forest paths I had cut, convinced I was the master of these woods. How blind I had been. The true guardian had walked beside me in silence, guided me through danger, and saved a helpless child. I rounded a bend and felt the weight of his absence like a hollow in my soul. I pressed on, carried by a mixture of wonder and reverence. I understood now that the forest held wisdom deeper than any man's mind, and that compassion could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the heart of a wild wolf. When I reached the clearing where I'd first built camp, the girl clung to my coat, eyes bright with gratitude. I set her down and looked to the tree line. I whispered to the pines and the wind and the unseen spirit of the wolf, "Thank you for showing me what it means to care." Then I turned to the girl and offered her my hand. Together we walked out of the forest's embrace and into the world beyond, forever changed by the mercy of a creature I once thought could only kill or flee. If your heart is pounding right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. Nature is full of mysteries. If you believe in a special bond with animals, right, we are not alone in this world.